Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfree, and I'm your host. Let me do this at the beginning. Please interact with the product somehow. I'm fine with however whatever your platform of choice is, right? We're on most of them. But if you could interact with the product a little bit, reviews if you happen to be on Apple Podcasts, star ratings, very, very helpful. Anywhere else, you can liking the individual episodes if at all possible, or just subscribing overall. All of that is very, very helpful to what's going on here. And people always mention the algorithm. YouTube in particular has this, but this is very true about all of these platforms. To boost the kind of traffic how much it assigns, spaces and whatnot. It's not just raw number of downloads and listens. That's certainly a part of it, but listener engagement is very significant when it comes to figuring out what pops up in recommended, how high things appear on a search bar, stuff like that. So anything you can do to help out, and if you've done all of that and are just listening to me ramble again anyway, I thank you for your patience. If you haven't, please do so. It all helps a lot. All right, on the agenda for this evening. Last night, the UFC had an event. It was an event. Wasn't a terribly compelling event, but we'll go over it. 14 fights on that card. I don't know why I didn't count those before, but 14 fights is just too many. I know they're trying to make up the averages, and I'm never against fighters getting paid, and they have to fight to be paid because that's what they're contracted to do. But man, these 14 fight cards, man, they're rough. They're just rough. It just takes a long time, and everything becomes a blur. You know, I'm going to be reading through the results of this, and I'm fairly certain that I'm going to I'm going to not get at least one of these correct. I don't remember a whole lot about them, which is weird because I have a very good memory as a general rule. So we'll talk about that. The biggest thing, of course, this coming Saturday, UFC 266, headlined by Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega competing over Volkanovski's featherweight title. Another title fight as well, and we'll run down that whole card. That's gonna take up the bulk of the episode, I think. Going through the rest of last night's card shouldn't take terribly long. We had some retirements, a couple of very prominent ones, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and whatever else news comes to mind. There was some stuff worth talking about, but I don't know. Again, a relatively quiet news week, all things considered. There's a few things I'm going to wind up folding into other segments, but that's the agenda. So with that out of the way, let's get into the show. Last night, UFC on ESPN plus 50. This was headlined by Anthony Smith and Ryan Spann. In your main event, Anthony Smith defeats Ryan Spann via rear naked choke, 347 of the first round. When they were just kind of throwing bombs at each other, it was when I say it was okay, I don't mean in a entertainment standpoint. Spann did okay in those segments, but even then, he got wobbled a few times. Smith just looked to be the much better fighter overall. He was able to drop Spann at least once, might have been twice, en route to the finish. The finish itself got the back, got the choke. Smith's grappling game is something people don't talk about a whole lot. His reputation, somewhat deservedly, is just kind of a marauding brawler, which, as I mentioned, he's somewhat earned that with a lot of some of his other performances, especially his early UFC stuff. He was just kind of blood and guts. When when he's had to go beyond being able to just either overwhelm someone quickly or something of that nature, he does a lot of really good work on the ground. I mean, he submitted Volkan Oezdemir. That was in the third round of their fight. People forget when he beat Alexander Gustafsson, he choked him. That was a rear naked choke in the fourth round. I mean, he was winning that fight anyway. But his wrestling isn't his takedown and wrestling game isn't something you think about a whole lot because it's not terribly dynamic. But his jiu-jitsu game, like once he gets on the ground and starts grappling, that's something we think people should pay a little bit more respect to. I mean, he caught Devin Clark in a triangle choke. Now, granted, that's Devin Clark, and it's not. And we'll talk about Clark in the next fight, actually. But his ground game gets slept on a little bit. Now, some of that is just one of the byproducts of light heavyweight and heavyweight. If you're on top, you're winning. It's not that there are no heavyweight or light heavyweight grapplers with a good guard game or a good off their backs. They exist. I'm, Big Nog, Frank Mir. Um, no, he's a middleweight. I mean, those are the two obvious ones, and uh, Barnett. Maybe Josh Barnett. I mean, Josh Barnett is good off of his back for a heavyweight, to be sure. Uh, but they're rare. They just don't come up a whole lot, and some of that's size, some of that's the size of the opponent, some of that's your physical limitations based on body size. You just don't see it all that often. It tends to be whoever is on top is the one winning. Now, you get into the lighter weight classes, and you still would rather be on top as a general rule, but some of those guys, some of those lighter, scramblier guys, they will tear you up from the bottom, man. That was actually one of the. This might sound really weird, but if you watch some of Khabib's earlier fights, as he was still kind of figuring out and perfecting his style, he would occasionally wind up on his back, either just losing the position scrambling, or someone who decided to take him down, whatever the case might have been. He was super active off of his back. Now, as he really refined what he did and how he did it, that became less and less of an issue because he didn't give people the chance to try and take him down. Tony Ferguson at his best was really active off of his backs, and some of those guys, they'll mess you up. You get to 205 in heavyweight, the guys who can fight effectively off of their backs are pretty limited. Like there's just not a lot of them. There's probably at least one light heavyweight that somebody's screaming at me now. Somebody listening is going so and so. I just can't honestly, for the life of me at the moment, think of anyone at 205 who's had a. Okay, maybe Paul Craig. Paul Craig is probably the closest we've got. Who has a kind of fairly dangerous guard. But in the last, I don't know, 10 years, so go back to like 2011, has there been a really good guard player at light heavyweight? Smith is kind of one of those guys. So his submission game is just something that I think we all need to consider it a little bit more thoroughly when we're talking about him. After the fact, he said for a while he wants a rematch with Alexander Rakic, and here's the thing about this. Right now, your top two contenders, you have let's start at the top. You have currently set for, I think, kind of the end of the coming up fairly shortly, Blachowicz and Glover Teixeira for the belt. Your next two contenders, and which order you choose to put these two gentlemen in is largely up to you personally. You have Alexander Rakic and Yuri Prochazka. Now, Prochazka's certainly had the more memorable fights of those two most recently. But, Rakic's only loss in the UFC was a split to Volkan Oezdemir that I think I scored it for Oezdemir live, but I don't. There is an argument for Rakic from what I can recall. I haven't watched the fight in a while. And his last two fights, he's beaten Anthony Smith and Thiago Santos. He's not beaten nobody. But those are the top two guys, and logic would kind of dictate that those two should fight. The winner gets the next title shot. But timing is a thing. And let's also face it, Rakic's last couple of fights have probably cooled the fan enthusiasm and somewhat in the same way, management's enthusiasm about him fighting for the belt. Whereas, Prochazka just went out there and what is his last fight? The Reyes? I feel like his last fight was the Dominic Reyes fight. I want to double check that real fast. Because, yeah, I mean, look, Prochazka's had 2 fights in the UFC. Uh, and he violently knocked out both Volkan Oezdemir and Dominic Reyes, both of them in the second round. I mean, that Reyes fight was a wild fight. He's the kind of fighter the UFC will reward for fighting the way that he does. So there's a non-trivial chance he'll just get the next shot. Like he knows that's what's the case is. He's going to get the next shot. So he might just be waiting for, again, Teixeira and Blachowicz to fight, however that goes. And if Yuri is, again, kind of sitting on that title shot, Rakic and Smith in a rematch isn't the worst thing in the world. It's not my preference. I tend to think I would rather see, if you just wanted the violence, right? And my status on enjoying the violence is very well documented on this show. If you just wanted the violence, you would do Anthony Smith and Yuri Prochazka. Like that would be the violence. That would be the most violent option, I think. So, yeah, that's that unless you wanted to give Rakic the title shot and make Prochazka have another one, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I don't think that's the way they're going to go. Now, we still have to wait for Teixeira and Blachowicz to fight, which could upend a lot of things if there's not really if we get a wonky finish to that, or a draw or something like that, that would upset the entire apple cart. But assuming that there's a clear winner to that, I mean the UFC gave. Oh god. Yeah, I got a thing. I got. Sorry, I just remembered of something else that's happening right now that we'll talk about on the news section, as it pertains to flyweight. So whoever wins that, assuming there's no controversy around it, there's not really an argument for, assuming Teixeira wins, there's not really an argument for Blachowicz to have an immediate rematch. He has one title defense. And it was a good win. I'm certainly not scoring that live. I recall giving it to Adesanya, but one, I don't always stand by that, because when I do these things live, I'm double checking my spelling. I'm occasionally having to rewrite sentences because they can get repetitive. Like there's things on my mind other than watching and scoring the fight straight ahead. I didn't object to Blachowicz winning, and I think I was able to watch that fight one more time, and my opinion kind of swung towards Blachowicz, but ultimately it was a good win, but it wasn't anything that you would necessarily hang your hat on for your legacy at light heavyweight. So if Teixeira beats him clean, which he very well might, I don't see a case for an immediate rematch. That doesn't always stop the UFC. It just means it's not something I really want to plan on, try and plan around. And I mean, ditto if Blachowicz wins. So assuming he beats Teixeira clean, it'll probably just be him and Yuri. So it's just a little bit. We have to wait for a few of those fights to play out because Anthony Smith really wants that. He's said this for a while. He wants that rematch with Rakic because Rakic beat him pretty soundly when they fought. He darn near crippled him with calf kicks. He took him down. He controlled him. It was a thorough win, not a terribly memorable win, but it was a thorough win. Yeah, I'm just looking at light heavyweight right now. You've got Teixeira fighting Blachowicz, Prochazka waiting in the wings, Rakic at number 3, why is Thiago Santos at 4? That seems very. You have Reyes at 5. I mean, I think Reyes has a lot of tools, but he has not been the same since he lost that fight with John Jones. And look, you can say that you thought he won. Doing it live, I scored it for John, but I've said before, I think that was the one fight I came away from feeling John probably lost. But after that, since then, he has not been the same. And for whatever reason, maybe just tough matchups, maybe people looked at the footage about what John did to him and were able to find holes. I'd have to give that a lot more thought and a lot more tape study. But 5 seems high for him. Ankalaev at 7. It's just a weird division, man. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of upward momentum. There's not a lot of I can't say there's none, but there's just man, there's just not a lot going on there. I know there's people who disagree with me on that take, and that's fine. I'm not here to comprehensively weigh out the merits of each individual division, because that debate largely centers around whether lightweight or bantamweight is better, and we all kind of agree that heavyweight and light heavyweight are at the bottom of that barrel. Which one is worse is largely dependent on which part of the roster you're looking at various points in time. So we might get that rematch. Rakic seemed amenable, as that Smith really wants it. It's not my personal preference, but the need to keep fights happening might supersede that. So we'll wait and see. As for Ryan Spann, Spann's a tough guy to kind of get a handle on. Just in the following ways. He was on a long winning streak he was on a long winning streak before he fought Johnny Walker. Some of those were pretty good wins. He beat Luis Enrique in his UFC debut by decision. That was not, a super memorable fight, but he acquitted himself well. He knocks out Little Nog, which everyone and their dog saw coming. He submitted Devin Clark. Where we all should have had a bit of pause is when he fought Sam Alvey to a split decision. Now, Sam Alvey kind of fights everyone to split decisions, which is kind of his thing. But that was a little bit telling. Then he gets knocked out by Johnny Walker after he hurts Walker. Rebounds by beating Serkinov and then gets tapped here. There's clearly ability there. Spann is a large man. He's like 6'5", I think. According to the officials, his official, height metric, he's 6'5". He's got power, but I don't know. I don't quite know where his strengths are. I don't quite know. If you would ask me to describe Ryan Spann as a fighter, I could give you some generic stuff, but I don't feel like there's. It's weird for a guy with almost 30 fights. He doesn't feel like a finished product, and that's just that's a little bit weird. Most guys, by the time they get here, even if they're fairly middle of the road guys, you can get a decent sense of them. And I don't quite have that with Spann. Which it might be more my fault. That's more of a me problem, I think. But that's also it's a little bit telling. I can tell you stuff about Smith. You asked me to describe Anthony Smith as a fighter. I have several things I can tell you about him. And Spann just not quite so much. So I don't know. He will wind up fighting somebody else, probably someone else ranked. But he came into this at what, 11? Yeah. So he'll probably fight somebody ranked below him next, but you took a step up and you lost. So that's usually what happens. Okay, last thing I want to mention briefly about Anthony Smith. This guy's career is one of the oddest, and I mean that in kind of a complimentary way. He went 5-6 in his first 11 fights, including a 4-fight losing streak at one point. There's not a lot of people that start their first 11 fights like that and then go on to the big success that he's had. He rebounded quite well. Appeared in Strikeforce with mixed results. He lost his UFC debut. Then left the UFC, fought in Bellator, won a couple of fights there, kept fighting. Eventually got back to the UFC. And he's been a little bit up and down, but more up than down by a fairly consistent margin. He debuts and he beats Leonardo Augusto Guimarães, then loses to Cesar Ferreira, wins 3 in a row, gets body kicked into the next life by Thiago Santos. That was one of the nastiest body kicks you'll ever see. Moves up in weight class from middleweight to 205. Knocks out 2 old men who shouldn't be fighting anymore. Rashad Evans, who would retire not long after, and Shogun, who should have retired. Then beats Volkan Oezdemir, and all of this is enough to earn him a title shot, where he is thoroughly outclassed by Jon Jones. If we're talking how the fight went, there is no debate, there is no discussion. He had nothing, he reliably offered nothing to Jon Jones. Jon was deducted 2 points for an illegal knee in the 5th round, and still won the fight handily on the scorecards. That's how one-sided that fight was. Smith could have taken the title. When he got hit with that illegal knee, he was down and Jon kneed him in the head. There's no ambiguity about the foul. If he'd said, "I can't fight," he would have won on a disqualification. Similar to how... Well, he could have won the title on a disqualification. I want to clarify that. That largely becomes the purview of the referee at that point because they're in the 5th round. If the ref wants, he could have had them go to a technical decision instead of just disqualifying Jon. But given the way that played out in the cage, he probably would have disqualified Jon. And Smith would have been the first UFC champion to win their belt via DQ. Instead, that went to Aljamain Sterling for the same foul, kneed in the head while they were downed. Also by a guy who was winning the fight handily. I don't know. I saw some different scorecards when it came to Jan and Sterling, but at a bare minimum, by the time that foul happened, Jan was well ahead as the fight was going on, and it was wildly going in his direction. But he doesn't. He rebounds by beating Alexander Gustafsson, which was a very impressive win at the time. It hasn't aged all that well, given what... Was that Gustafsson's... He fought at 205 against Verdum. That's the other heavyweight, Verdum. Fabricio Verdum has a very good guard. I knew there was one I was forgetting. Yeah, it was right before that. So, Gustafsson... That hasn't aged all that well, because Gustafsson doesn't seem to have... That rematch with Jon, man. I mean, Gustafsson has had injury issues and inactivity related to those. But for a while, he went on he only had one, he lost his second UFC fight when he was submitted by Phil Davis. Went on a really long winning streak. Lost a title fight with Jon Jones. That's still my vote for best light heavyweight fight ever. Certainly light heavyweight title fight. That's just a great fight. Loses that. Beats Jimmy Manuwa, gets stopped by Anthony Johnson. Fights to a split decision with Daniel Cormier for the belt. I thought he won that fight. Straight up. Odd. If you ask both Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier who their toughest fight was, I think they both say it was Gustafsson. He gave those two guys hell. And I thought he beat Cormier, but he didn't. On the scorecards, he didn't. Beats Blachowicz, beats Teixeira, then gets stopped pretty violently by Jon in their rematch. And he hasn't been the same since. He loses to Smith, he goes up to heavyweight and gets tapped by Verdum quickly. So not that hasn't aged the best, but then you get the rough stretch. He fights Glover Teixeira and is TKO'd in the 5th after literally getting his teeth knocked out. Then he fights... That Teixeira fight was May of 2020. In August of 2020, he fights Rakic. So just 3 months later. And he is utterly lifeless in that fight with Rakic. He then fights again in November And this time he gets a much softer touch with Devin Clark, and he triangle chokes him. And then 2021 thus far beats Jimmy Crute, beats Ryan Spann, both in the first round. Well, the Crute fight was between rounds, but still. If you'd asked me after that Rakic loss, and I think I said this, like, that's not a good spot, man. You know, at the time, the Rakic fight was his 40 what? Ninth? Yeah. That was his 49th fight. That's a lot of fights. And to have just kind of been worn down by the years and the miles, and he's had some knockdown drag out affairs. Some of them he came out the winner, some of them he came out the loser. And he's not old, man. I mean, he's 33. He's younger than I am. That is, but that's still he at this point he's got almost 60. He's got 52 fights at 33 years old. He debuted. Yeah, his first fight was in February of 2008. He's been doing this for a long time. And and for him to pick himself up after that stretch, losing to Jones, beating Gustafsson, then losing badly to Teixeira, losing to Rakic, like that's the kind of stretch at the end of that some fighters end their careers on, especially fighters who have, 50 fights at that point. And he, with his team, kind of retooled, not a lot, but they kind of, they fixed a few things, and he persevered, and I don't think he's getting the next title shot, but he's not that far away. If he wins his next fight, whether that's Rakic or Prochazka or whoever, he might be next after that. Like, he might just be one win away from another title shot. That's somewhat remarkable. So kudos to you, sir. Just wanted to bring that up, man. His career is something that you don't see all that often. It is very, very rare to have done what he has done the way that he has done it, and that deserves to be mentioned. All right, let's see. All right, we shouldn't take as long getting through the rest of these. Iwan Kutelaba defeated Devin Clark via unanimous decision, 30-26, 29-26, 29-27. I think I was 30-25. Like, I think I gave Kutelaba 10-8s in all 3 rounds. This was a beating. Kutelaba just kind of smashed Clark. I mean, Clark is tough as nails, man. A fraction of that level of abuse has stopped other elite level fighters. His teeth got at Kutelaba in the second round hit him with a knee to the face in the fence, illegal knee, very legal, and it bad. Like he started spitting blood immediately. His lower teeth are jacked. I mean, there's pictures floating around on Twitter. Right, I think the ESPN MMA Twitter account has some stills of it. They are messed up. Like, he got wrecked. I don't know that they needed to let him out there for that third round. Now, a couple of the judges thought he won that round. I think that was more due to Kutelaba just kind of not willing to be managing risk, right? You're up huge. You're up universally 2-10-8s. That's the only way the 29-27 scorecard. Is it? So, okay, so one judge didn't give him a... I might have been 30-24, which I think might have been a slight exaggeration. Point being, you're up huge. I mean, you are up in such a way that there's no... You can give this round away. He could have given that round away 10-8 and won the fight. Like, that's how much he was ahead. And it's not like he stopped trying to win. He didn't run away. But he also didn't quite put out the same finishing attempts that he did in the first couple of rounds. Which, managing a fight like that is a skill, and it's something that needs to be appreciated. So, Kutelaba gets a win. Good for him. The fight was again, it was brutal, but watch the first round and then know that the next two were just kind of more of that. Ariane Lipski defeated Mandy Baum via unanimous decision, 30-27. Easily Lipski's best performance in the UFC. Hands down. She had good takedowns. She had much better work on the ground overall. Her striking looked better. She was throwing combinations more. Easily Lipski's career best performance. Arman Sarukian defeated Christos Giagos via TKO punches 209 of the first. So this was kind of a setup for Sarukian. Sarukian has demonstrated a lot of ability. I mean, his debut was a short notice replacement fight against Islam Makhachev. And while he lost that fight, rewatch that fight if you haven't seen it, by the way. So watch it if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, it's worth a rewatch. That is a nut. That's one of the best wrestling fights. Certainly north of bantamweight that you'll ever see. And when I say wrestling, I mean that in the purest sense. Wrestling is what happens until someone concedes a position. Makhachev and Sarukian wrestle each other, and it is a lot of fun. He did that on short notice. He's undefeated since then, but he'd kind of been coasting. I mean that's a little bit unfair, but he hadn't been putting guys away. I mean, all of his UFC wins, I think, prior to this were decisions. Yeah, he out-grappled. I mean, he beat some tough guys to do that. Let me be clear. He out-wrestled Olivier Aubin-Mercier, which is not easy. He out-wrestled Davi Ramos, which is, again, not easy. Matt Frivola was... Oh, that's weird. He went from Ramos to Frivola. I would actually consider Frivola probably a little step down. But the point being, he had been putting those guys away. And the Frivola fight in particular, you got the sense he could have. I mean, okay, you couldn't finish Olivier Aubin-Mercier, okay? Aubin-Mercier is a tough guy to finish, as a general rule. Couldn't quite finish Davi Ramos. You're a wrestler. Ramos is the grappler that he is. Like, that might have just been an unpleasant style matchup in terms of, probability of a finish. You fight Matt Frivola, you probably should have got him out of there. And that was kind of the thing. You really should start finishing some people. And here he fights Giagos and knocks him out. TKOs him in the first round rather quickly. Giagos threw a kick at him. He parried it. And Giagos landed a little bit too square, right? Instead of bringing his leg all the way back into his stance, he landed a little bit more square with it. I think he might have been anticipating a takedown attempt coming off of that, because then squaring up your hips to sprawl them back makes sense. And his hands drop ever so slightly, I imagine, to battle for underhooks, expecting the double leg. And instead of shooting the double leg, Sarukian punches him in the temple, hit him with a nice left hook, wobbles him, and then pounds him out. Much needed performance out of Sarukian. Nate Maness scored a pretty significant comeback against Tony Gravely, TKOing him in the second at 210. Gravely drops Maness at the end of the first. There's a couple of seconds left, and if there's 5 more seconds in that round, might have finished him. Or, someone else pointed out, the way Maness fell, if he drops him and then walks away, maybe the ref waves it off. I mean, that's a split-second calculation that you can't make. You commit to whichever direction you're going with that, but who knows? But he was hurt bad. Comes back in the second. He's takes him about another minute to recover, but he does, and he starts hurting Gravely to the body, catches him with a left hook to the body. Gravely tries to fire back and eats this right kind of shovel hook, sits him down, and he pounds him out. A really good comeback. Fun little fight, actually. This would have been my fight of the night. The UFC did not officially award one, but I think that would have been mine. And kicking off the main card, Joaquin Buckley defeated Antonio Arroyo via knockout punches at 2:26 of the third. Not a whole lot up until the finish, and Buckley hit a nice finish. He hit this kind of clubbing overhand right where his forearm kind of he was throwing the overhand right, and Hoyo in defending stepped a little bit closer, kind of ducked, and that meant that the forearm kind of hit him in the back of the head, which is one of the risks of that particular defense against that particular punch, but in theory it's better than getting punched in the face by the knuckles. That kind of wobbled him, and then Buckley pressed the action and hit a right uppercut that was it, man. That was the one that knocked him out. So uh, Buckley needed the rebound after Alessio Di Chirico head kicked him. I also need to make a minor correction from last week. There was one other fight between Buckley after he hit the jump spinning back kick on Impa Kasanganay. He did have a win before the head kick of Di Chirico. So I've forgotten about that other fight. And I mentioned last week the kind of trail of head kick knockouts. There was one fight in between those, so but still an odd little habit to notice there. Anyway, that was your main card. As for the prelims, Tafon Chukwi defeated Mike Rodriguez via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Raquel Pennington defeated Pani Kianzad via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. I don't have a whole lot to say. Look, Mike Rodriguez I don't know why, he's probably not with the UFC anymore after this. I mean, he's had moments where he could have won, or he was beating the crap out of Ed Herman and then for some reason got caught in this stupid Kimura trap. It was a giant brain fart on his part. Pennington over Kianzad, not a terribly interesting fight. Women's bantamweight is... that division is in dire need of a shakeup. I don't think that's a really debatable point. Let's see. Rongju defeated Brandon Jenkins via TKO punches in the third round. Rong missed weight for this. Okay, for the record, I've only ever seen his name listed as Rongju, but because he's Chinese, Rong is his surname. That's his family name, so just for the record, that's the best I can make out of that. Good performance from Rong. The first little bit of the first round was a bit more even, but he just had more firepower. He missed weight for this, which is never a good thing. But he was up both rounds before the finish. Just a good performance out of him. I've mentioned this before a little bit at some other different points in time. But the difference between, the traditional jiu-jitsu metagame and sort of what Khabib had done in terms of decision making and certain positional preferences. Watching Rong when he was doing the fence wrestling, he's very clearly utilizing the Khabib meta. Now that's not to say he does what Khabib did. He's not that level of wrestler. He doesn't quite have the same level of ground and pound. This is not a one-to-one comparison. It's simply an observation that in positions where you have to make a choice, I fight for control. I try to attain a reasonable control position and then maintain it while dealing damage, prioritizing that, and then the ability to hit mat returns. Or you prioritize trying to advance position to something more dominant that, in theory, gives you a better chance of finishing, but also in your passing attempts opens up other opportunities for the other guy to escape. Rong was pretty clearly erring on the side of, I'm going to just fight for wrist control, I'm going to ride your leg, I'm going to hit mat returns, and I'm going to wear you down and sneak in punches where I can. I think we're going to see more of that. I don't want to get too deep off on this tangent, but Khabib's decision to attack the meta of grappling in MMA was a very fascinating one. The skills that he decided to focus on and how he chose to use them in order to attack what people were doing, how to make that work for him, was a very, very savvy, very strategic decision. And it's not easy. What he did was very, very difficult. But we're going to see more people, I think, start approaching it that way. Just my 2 cents on that. And Rong was just That was my big takeaway from that, was observing that about him and his stylistic choices. Bantamweight, Montel Jackson defeated JP Bays via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. Bays was a lot gamer than I thought he would be, but the size difference, man. Bays was like 5 inches shorter and gave up 8.5 of reach. Uh, that just, he had a good, the first round was pretty good, but that just kind of kept falling apart for him the longer the fight went on. He got knocked down 4 times, I think, in the third round. This was, Bays took this on short notice. I think this was supposed to be, this is supposed to be Montel Jackson and Dana Batgary, which would have been a heck of a fight, actually. I hope they make that. But the way this played out, Jackson's a pretty legitimate. He's got 2 losses in the UFC. He debuted against Ricky Simone, and boy, is that a rough fight. Then he beat Brian Kelleher, beat Andre Sukumtat, beat Felipe Colares. Those are good wins. Again, the Sukumtat I don't think is with the UFC anymore, but then he loses to Brett Johns, and then proceeds to beat Jesse Strader and JP Bays. He's a good prospect. The guys he's lost to in both Simone and Johns are quite good. I think they're both ranked, actually. I know Simone is. Let me double check, actually. So, where is Ricky Simone? Is he not ranked anymore? Huh. That's, well, some of that might be activity. I feel like Simone should be ranked. Well, the loss to Rob Font hurt him. Oh, he might have moved up to featherweight. I know he did for at least his last fight, but that's odd. And Johns, did he get cut? When did he leave the UFC? Oh, wow, yeah, he's with Bellator now. Dang, lost his Bellator debut, actually. That's a shame, man. Brett Johns is a really good fighter. He had a couple of losses in the UFC, but they were to Aljamain Sterling and Pedro Munoz. Then he won 2 fights, and then apparently he liked the offer he got from Bellator more than the one he got from the UFC, so. Now that's a shame. Point being, Jackson's only losses are to pretty darn good fighters. But, so he's still refining a little bit, but good win for him here. Let's see. Erin Blanchfield defeated Sarah Alpar. This was a beating. Unanimous decision, 230-25, 130-26. The 30-26 was actually generous. I was 30-25. Alpar did not have a whole lot to offer Blanchfield on the feet, on the mat. Blanchfield just beat the crap out of her. Let's see. Carlston Harris defeated Impa Kasanganay via TKO punches, 238 of the first. Pretty good win for Harris, actually. Gotta remember how he did that. What was the setup for that? Yeah, they just got into some 50-50 exchanges, and he landed better. And then his finishing instinct was quite good here. He gets the ride position, a single leg ride, and he wraps up inside wrist control, kind of like I know technically grapevining is done with the legs, but if I say he grapevined the arm with his arm, you'll know what I mean. Grapevined the far arm like that with his arm, and that really limited Kasanganay's. He can't quite call it wrist control. He never actually gets the wrist, and he just unloaded with rights, forced the stoppage. Pretty good win for Harris, actually. Harris is what? I think this makes him 2-0 or 3-0 in the UFC. Pretty good win. He might be someone to pay attention to. There's still stuff you'd like to see ironed out, but he's got enough fights overall that he should be in the refining phase rather than the really kind of adding things to his game phase. Let's see. Bantamweight, Gustavo Lopez and Alatong Hele went to a unanimous draw, 28-28. Alatong was deducted a point in the third round for flagrant and repeated fence grabs, costing it. This is all on him, man. He threw this fight away. He won the first two rounds pretty clearly. Lopez was game, but he was always a little bit outgunned, a little bit outpositioned. Then in the third, Lopez stops being quite so technical, starts putting it on Alatong. I think his calf kicks were working a little bit more. He was able to get some stuff done in the clinch, get some takedowns, and for some reason, Alatong is grabbing the fence to avoid mat returns. And eventually the ref had enough and deducted a point. This led to Lopez winning the third round 10-8 and giving us the draw. The draw's the correct outcome. There's no controversy here about that. First two rounds to Alatong, third round to Lopez, and then you have the point deduction. That's it. Oh, he threw this one away, man. He completely just threw it away. He should have won this 29-28, but if you break the rules. And kicking off the main card, Hannah Goldie was kind of getting worked over by Emily Whitmire until she catches an armbar, 4:17 of the first round. Goldie's first win in the UFC. She really needed that one. Decent enough armbar, I suppose. Your bonuses, there was no fight of the night as mentioned. Your performances of the night go to Anthony Smith, Arman Saruki, Nate Maness, and Joaquin Buckley. That's all fair. 14 fights. If you're interested in my live play-by-play coverage, the full report is over in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. So please go over there and give that a read if you're so inclined. All right. That took a little bit longer than I expected it to, but let's move on. UFC 266 this coming weekend. This is once again, there's issues with visas and COVID, so some of these fights we don't actually have a full bout order for. Our main card is currently secure. Your main event, Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega. These two were supposed to fight earlier this year, but Volkanovski contrasted a fairly gnarly case of COVID, actually. And that got bumped back to... And then they shot The Ultimate Fighter, which I keep forgetting happens because it's a terrible waste of everyone's time and energy. Anyway, it leads us to this point. This is a good fight. Ortega getting it off of the back of just one win prior to his... after his title loss. He had the fight with Holloway there where they stopped it after the fourth round. Deservedly so. That was he took a serious beating from Max Holloway. And I suppose to his credit, he was losing every round, but he got some licks in on Max along the way. Then he's off for almost 2 years, comes back, beats Chan Sung Jung in a pretty good fight, actually. Ortega... It's weird trying to get a handle on this guy. His primary skill set is jiu-jitsu. That's mostly what he's known for, but he doesn't have great takedowns. His boxing is weird because there's some stuff that he does right, but there's a lot of pieces around the stuff that he does right that aren't quite there, so he does a lot of shoulder rolls, but he doesn't counter off of them all that well. And he tends to shoulder roll and then come right back to the center line, so he gets hit a lot. I mean, if you watch his fight with Max Holloway, he was frequently able, anytime Max would throw a combination, he was able to kind of mitigate the first couple of punches, but the third and fourth, would always hit him. And he's a little bit, his defense is a little bit high, so his body's a touch open. But he's good about firing back. He's got power. and he's got some surprisingly tricky setups on occasion. You know, he'll shoulder roll and try an up, like an elbow off the side that he's rolling, or what was the one he tried one on Max, then he caught it on he hit it on Chan Sung Jung. He's got kind of a shoulder roll into a spinning back elbow that. Again, Max seemed to have a read on it because he tried it on Max and missed, and then Jung walked into it, wobbled him pretty badly. So he's got some of these tricky setups. His jiu-jitsu is exceptional. I don't say that lightly. He's an exceptional jiu-jitsu practitioner. But he hasn't, the closest he's gotten to showing a really consistent game was the fight with Jung. If you look at some of the other fights, one of the things about Ortega, he is always in the fight. His first fight in the UFC got overturned after he failed a drug test. But if you look at the next few fights, he had, 4 consecutive third round finishes? Yeah, Thiago Tavares, Diego Brandao, Clay Guida, and Renato Moicano were all third rounds. Fights he was... The Tavares fight might have been even going into the third. I think he was behind on the Brandao fight. I had him around a piece in the Guida fight, and I think I had him around a piece in the Moicano, but he was... Point being, those were not gimmies. He was not up big and still won. Some of those he might have needed the finish, depending on how the relevant judges were scoring it. Then he chokes out Cub Swanson in fairly quick order. Does kind of drop the first round, if I seem to recall, though. I'd have to double check that. Then he brutally knocks out Frankie Edgar in the first round to get his title shot, and then he is no match for Max Holloway. But he's got some good pieces to his game. On the other hand, you are staring down, in my opinion, the best featherweight in the world, in Alexander Volkanovski. Volkanovski, as a reminder, people are so hung up on the scoring of that second fight with Max Holloway. I think we need to appreciate something about Volkanovski here. He started his career at welterweight and went 4-1 at 170. He spent the next bit of his career bouncing between lightweight and featherweight. And he's never lost at either 155 or 145. He debuted in the UFC as, I think he came in at featherweight, right? No, he came in at lightweight. Since then, he's returned to featherweight. And look, he's had one close fight in that entire time. Let me just, for the sake of argument, the following is Alexander Volkanovski's UFC record. He TKOs Yusuke Kasuya in the second round. That was one-way traffic. He beat the crap out of that man. He defeats Mizoto Hirota via unanimous decision. Again, fairly one-way fight. He beats Shane Young. Fairly one-way fight. He TKOs Jeremy Kennedy in the second round. He puts a serious beating on Darren Elkins. Wins a unanimous decision. He stops Chad Mendez in the second round. Then proceeds to beat Jose Aldo via clear-cut 3-round decision, 30-27 on all 3 scorecards. Beats Max Holloway in this first title fight. Becomes the first man since Conor McGregor, I think, to beat him at featherweight. And then beats him in the rematch. I mean, look, you can argue the split decision all you want. I scored that fight for Volkanovski, but I've also said that fight tends to swing on one round. And the round in question is very, very, very close. So I don't think it's wrong to score it for Max, but his first fight with Max wasn't... I hate to say it wasn't close because that implies that he blew him out of the water, but the scoring was non-controversial. That was what? Okay. There was one guy who gave, two of the judges were 48-47. I think they gave Max rounds 4 and 5. Personally, I think I gave Volkanovski 4 of the 5 rounds, and then one of the judges gave him all 5, which it's a little bit iffy. But there was no outcry about the scoring of that fight. Certainly not like there was the second one. But think about that for just a minute. Look at that resume. This man, in consecutive fights, he finished Chad Mendes, blanked out Jose Aldo, and then beat Max Holloway twice. Can we put some respect on this man's name, for crying out loud? He's also somewhat derided as a point fighter, and I have to call bull on that. Look, his last 3 fights have been against a whopping 2 men, Jose Aldo and Max Holloway. You want to know the last guy to finish? If we start with Aldo, okay, Jose Aldo got finished by Conor, and I think that was then he got finished by Peter Yan. So the only people to finish Aldo in the UFC, Conor, Max, and Yan. Okay, that's it. That man just, if your game plan is I'm going to try to finish Jose Aldo, especially over only 3 rounds, good luck. I mean, Max was able to finish him in the 3rd in both of their fights, but Yan took until the 5th. And yeah, that fight should have been stopped much earlier in the 5th round, but there was no argument for it really being stopped before that. It's just not really you're not really going to get somewhere deciding that you're going to, swing hell for leather against Jose Aldo. And then Max, has Max been, I don't think Max has been finished since his first fight. Yeah. Okay. The only time in Max Holloway's entire career that he's been finished was his UFC debut in his 5th professional fight, when he stepped up on somewhat short notice and was submitted via mounted triangle armbar by Dustin Poirier. What are some of the other people that he's fought? In fact, let's just look at, there's not a lot of losses here. But if we look at his losses, because that's the most relevant, lost a split decision to Dennis Bermudez, he should have won. I'm on record for that. Lost a unanimous decision to Conor. When Conor was on the ascension, right? This is 2013. Conor's on his way to becoming king of the world. He couldn't put away Max Holloway. Goes on this stupidly long winning streak. Moves up to lightweight for a rematch with Dustin Poirier after he beats Brian Ortega. Dustin Poirier in the rematch can't finish him. He comes back down, he beats Frankie Edgar, then he loses twice to Volkanovski. You wanna lose to Max Holloway? Go in there and try to finish that man. Like, if that's your game plan, if that's what you're reliant on, you're going to lose badly. So he fought intelligent fights designed around his opposition. And yeah, again, you want to go out there and decide, my game plan is going to be finishing Max Holloway. If you see an opportunity, you shouldn't, there's a degree to which you shouldn't let it get away from you. But you can't brawl with Max Holloway. He wants you to try. But Volkanovski is a very, very good fighter. He's good about disrupting your timing and your rhythm. His feinting game is incredible. His footwork is exceptional. He is physically strong as an ox. He's got a good... This is the other thing people forget, because you tend to look just at the last couple of fights. His clinch game is very good. And if he gets you down, his top control and ground and pound is ferocious. He's a guy that operates very much in the Khabib meta in that respect. He hasn't done it a lot lately because, again, his last 3 opponents are Chad Mendes, Jose Aldo, and Max Holloway. You wrestle with Chad Mendes as much as you have to, but that's But you don't really decide going into it that you're going to just wrestle with that guy. You kind of have to feel that out. Then he clinched Jose Aldo very successfully. Jose Aldo's not easy to control, and he did so. Then you fight Max. I mean, trying to take Max down is. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but even Dustin Poirier struggled to get him down, and Poirier's a big, strong lightweight at that point. Was able to get some control time against the fence, but couldn't reliably get him down. I mean, even the control that he had against him was hard fought. So that's just not a skill set he's been able to bring to bear. If you want to see what he's capable of, go back and watch his fights with Jeremy Kennedy and Darren Elkins. Like, he gets on top of Jeremy Kennedy and he smashes that guy. Just punches him through the canvas, basically. My inclination here is Volkanovski. Ortega hits hard and he's been improving. That's not to be discounted. But I think Ortega's, he does have some nice traps. He's a bit linear. And that's a rough spot to be in against Volkanovski. Volkanovski's ability to fight high and low, he disrupts your timing, he kicks you in the leg, he feints you to draw you out. He's good wherever the fight happens to go. For whatever my pick's worth, I'm picking Volkanovski, but I'm not going to be too shocked if Ortega wins. This is a good fight. I'm very much looking forward to it. I lean Volkanovski. I don't have to the co-main event. I don't have to think about all that much. Women's flyweight champion Valentina Shevchenko will defend her title against Lauren Murphy. Lauren Murphy is on a winning streak, to her credit. It is 5 fights long. The problem, for me at least, I thought she lost 2 of those. She won a split decision over Andrea Lee that I thought she lost. And her most recent fight was a split decision win over Joanne Calderwood that most people thought she lost. Look, Murphy is physically strong. She's got a decent enough ground game. But her striking's rough. Her defense is porous. And this might seem like a weird thing, but she marks up real easy. I mean, you look at some of those fights that she won at the end of the split, and her face is kind of a mess. I don't think she's got much of a chance here. And look, somebody is going to beat Valentina one of these days, right? That's just kind of the way it is. Everybody loses at some point. I have no real reason to think it's going to be Lauren Murphy here. And I'm not trying to be dismissive of her. She's worked very, my disagreement with the scoring is that's not her fault. But I think her face is going to get turned into hamburger here. If she can't control you in the clinch, and you kind of work that real close pocket boxing, the real like dirty boxing, clinch fighting, and mix in takedowns successfully, I don't think she has a whole lot to offer. And Shevchenko's really good in those spaces too. I mean, Shevchenko has never lost at 125. She moved up to bantamweight when she had the cut stoppage against Liz Carmouche. Then went on a long winning streak, lost to Nunes unanimously their first time, got a rematch, lost a split decision that I scored for her, but c'est la vie. Then she moved to flyweight and has been darn near untouchable. She, murdered Priscilla Cachoeira. She beat Joanna, I think it was 50-45 across the board when she beat Joanna. 49-46 across the board. I don't remember which round they gave Joanna, but okay. She hits one of the sickest knockouts you'll see when she head kicked Jessica Ai into into a myriad of health issues, apparently. I say that as a joke because for the last like 4 fights Jessica I has come out with, she said, well, I fixed this. And it turns out I had this. I had gallbladder problems, which are nothing to... I'm not saying she didn't. But I had my gallbladder out and my overall health has improved. Okay, and then she loses. Well, turns out I had a bunch of food allergies that I fixed. And then, there's just always seems to be something that poor woman's trying to fix. She beats Liz Carmouche via comically wide decision. She stops Caitlin Chukagian. Everybody loses their mind. I said this before, UFC 255. Everybody lost their minds because Jennifer Maia won the first round against her. As though she didn't win the other 4 rounds fairly easily. Easily might be a bit of a stretch, but there was no debate around the scoring of that fight. It was, she lost the first round. What does this mean? Well, it means she wins the other 4 rounds and wins the fight. And her last fight, boy, she just smashed. She abused Jessica Andrade. I mean, that was pretty nasty. And I don't know how Lauren Murphy wins this fight. Maybe if she's been hiding a bunch of punching power and her technique is suddenly improved, she can sneak something in, but I think this is Valentina's fight to lose. So, I pick Shevchenko easily. That women's flyweight is barely a division. Our next fight, the featured bout, is a rematch 17 years in the making, when former welterweight champion Robbie Lawler will fight Nick Diaz. Not Nate, Nick. These two first fought, as mentioned, 17 years ago at UFC 47. This is going to be a 5-round fight. I don't think it'll need all 5 rounds, but we'll have to see. Here's the thing about this fight. I need to get this out of the way. For some people, there will be a nostalgia factor for this, not me. I think this will probably be a somewhat entertaining fight, but I don't actually care. And I'm shocked that I feel that way, in all honesty. You'd think there would be something here that would kind of make me go, yeah, that'll be fun. But look, guys, Nick Diaz hasn't fought since 2015 in January when he lost to Anderson Silva. I know that got overturned, but he lost that fight. I mean, he hasn't won a fight in 10 years. Okay. His last win was October 29th, 2011, when he beat BJ Penn. So almost 10 years. This man has not won a fight. And he hasn't not fought at all since January of 15. So, what? Over 6.5 years? I know there's a very loyal fan base to the Diaz brothers, and I get it. I'm not one of them. And then there's Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler has not won a fight since 2017, when he won a unanimous decision over Donald Cerrone. Robbie Lawler is 1-5 in his last 6 fights. He was knocked out by Tyron Woodley, beat Cerrone, lost a clear unanimous decision to Rafael dos Anjos. Okay, you can argue the stoppage in the fight with Ben Askren. A little bit wonky, but putting that aside, he then loses a clear 5-round fight with Colby Covington and then loses a 3-round fight with Neil Magny in largely the same way. I'm not saying these two won't have an entertaining fight. I'm really not. But one guy who's been out of action for almost 7 years. And 6. My math is wonky. Sorry, 6 years. And one who hasn't really been able to pull the trigger in at least 3 of his last 4 fights. They might recapture some magic here. They really might. But this is a one-off. It's not indicative of anything long-term for either man. I'm just not that jazzed about it. I'm not even entirely sure who I could pick here. You know what? This might sound really... I'm going to flip a coin. I'm literally just going to flip a coin. So we'll go heads, Diaz, tails, Lawler. Tails, Lawler. That's probably wrong. Am I really about to pick Nick Diaz here? That layoff, man. That long layoff. Alright, here's my hesitancy on each side. Robbie Lawler is looking a little bit shop-worn, right? He's not pulling the trigger like he used to. He's being outworked. He's being outclinched. He's just not pulling the trigger. Of all the problems that Nick Diaz has as a fighter, and of all the problems he's going to have as a fighter in this fight relative to Robbie Lawler, pulling the trigger is not one of them. He's going to pull the trigger. The question I have is he in fight shape? And look, I know physically he's gotten himself back from being very out of shape. That's not quite the same as fight shape, so is he going to be in shape to go 5 rounds? Something of an open question. Leaning towards yes. His preparation is usually quite good. But he's also... Geez, how old is he now? He's 38. I mean, look, Lawler's no spring chicken. Geez, Lawler's older. These two guys are almost 40. Okay, let's just take a second here and think about that. These two gentlemen are almost 40. They're 38 and 39. With that long layoff for Diaz, I got this weird visual in my head. Look, and let me just straight up. They're going to trade. Diaz is going to get hit. If his chin's not gone, he's going to survive. And Lawler has just been backed up a lot lately. Spent a lot of time with his back on the fence. And a lot of time kind of getting teed off there. And that's really what Nick Diaz loves to do. Yeah, you know what? I think I am going to pick Nick. I'm going to pick Diaz, and in reality, who the hell knows? If Lawler is smart, they're both southpaws. If Lawler's smart, he could do some damage with calf kicks, especially. I'm picking Diaz. I think Lawler's just a little bit too shop-worn at this point. I may be wrong, but I mostly hope this fight doesn't go long. I don't need having 3 different fights scheduled for 5 rounds. You're pushing your luck a little bit there. All right, heavyweight. Curtis Blades will fight Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Huh. Blades, he was beating Derek Lewis until he tried to wrestle him and then got knocked out. Rozenstruik. Yeah, he beat Sakai. I'm going to pick Blades, but I won't be shocked if Rozenstruik wins this. Put it like that. And kicking off the main card, Jessica Andrade will fight Cynthia Calvillo. Andrade's coming off of that failed attempt to take the title from Valentina Shevchenko. And Calvillo, coming off a unanimous decision loss to Caitlin Chookagian. I don't have a reason to pick against Jessica Andrade here. Andrade is... Calvillo's a little bit one note, and she has not looked great lately. I'm gonna pick... Yeah, I'm picking Andrade. All right, what we have for the rest of this fight, I'm gonna read off everything that currently has a bout order, and then there's 3 fights that don't have a place yet, so bear with me. On the prelims, Marlon Moraes and Merab Dvalishvili. Moraes needs a win. I don't think he's gonna get it. Dvalishvili has... That man's fight motor is absurd. I mean, you can say that about a lot of guys throughout history. I think this guy might be his pace and his activity. He might be the most active fighter once the bell rings that I've ever seen. I mean, the man just doesn't stop. It's a little bit crazy. Uh, I mean, I suppose sentimentally I'll be rooting for Moraes, but I think this is a really tough matchup for him. Lightweight fight, Dan Hooker and Nasrat Haqparast. It's a good fight. I think Hooker. Did Hooker take this on short notice? I want to double check. I feel like he did. Or at the bare minimum, like there was he wasn't sure he was going to get visa approval to be here. Like there was some drama around this. I'm going to pick Hooker. I mean, he's lost his last couple of fights. He had that absolute war with Dustin Poirier. I mean, that was a... Boy, you talk about a fight that'll take time off your life, man. Then he lost to Michael Chandler fairly quickly. Yeah, I mean, Haqparast is a good fighter, but I don't think he's... I don't think he's fought someone on Hooker's level. Heavyweight fight, Shamil Abdurakhimov and Chris Daukaus. I picked Daukaus rather easily here. Abdurakhimov is a decent enough guy to have on the roster, but Daukaus, I think, is someone we're going to be talking about as... I'm not saying champion. I'm not saying that at all. But he's 3-0 in the UFC with 3 first-round finishes. He's got fast hands. He's a smaller heavyweight, but he knows how to fight to that. I tend to think pretty highly of Daukaus' ceiling at this point, so I think he's probably going to take that. Let's see. Also on the prelims, we have Manon Fiorot and Maria Buena Silva. Fiorot she put a beating on her opponent in her last couple of fights. I think Fiorot takes this. Middleweight Carl Robertson and Nick Maximov. Robertson could use a win. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. Yeah, I'm going to pick Robertson, but his back's against the wall a little bit. Welterweight fight between Matthew Semmelsberger and Martin Sano Jr. Should go Semmelsberger. Then we have these other 3 fights that don't yet have a spot on the bout order. We have Jalen Turner and Ursos Medic, that lightweight. Probably lean Turner here. Women's flyweight fight between Roxanne Modafferi and Tayla Santos. I think probably Santos. Unless I'm confusing her with somebody else, and I might be. I think I am. I mean, what's Modafferi done lately? Trading wins and losses since coming back to the UFC. If that pattern holds, she'll win here. I'm still gonna lean Santos, but that's close, and I won't be surprised one bit if Modafferi wins. And a featherweight fight between Omar Morales and Jonathan Pierce. Probably lean towards Morales. Morales has a surprisingly good UFC record. His only loss is to Giga Chikadze. Like, he's beat everybody else. Now, beat Donghyun Ma. That's Donghyun Kim at the Maestro. Gabriel Benitez and Shane Young. Yeah, I'm okay picking Morales there. So that's UFC 266 this coming Saturday. So I hope you will stop by in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. There are some good fights there. Your main event is a very good featherweight fight. And if you're nostalgic, Diaz and Lawler is not bad. And watch it. Look, even if Valentina Shevchenko goes out there and, smashes Lauren Murphy in the first round, you, if you're the champion, that's kind of what happens sometimes. Sometimes you go steamroll an opponent. Sometimes you're in the fight of your life. Uh, Tune in. If nothing, even if I'm right, okay, even if every expert is right, and Shevchenko wins handily, I'm not going to pretend there's not some interest in seeing how she'll do it. I'm a fan of violence, so her performing violence is something I'm interested in. Yeah. So that's the card. I hope you'll stop by and follow along with my live play-by-play on that one. I suppose very quickly I should mention there was a Bellator event last night as well. Phil Davis defeated Yoel Romero via split decision in their 3-round main event. First of all, the judge who scored that for Romero should probably be fired. I gave Romero the second as I was kind of half watching live, but 1 and 2 are clearly Davis. Like this shouldn't have been hard. I think one of the things Romero mentioned after the fact was, he thought they were in a 5-round fight instead of a 3-rounder. To be clear, Bellator, why are you still doing 3-round main events? That seems a little bit odd. I don't know why you're doing that. I don't. Just a weird fight. Phil Davis, to his eternal credit, this was not the same kind of split decision that he had with, Lyoto Machida that he really should have lost. He pretty clearly won at least 2 rounds. You could argue he won all 3, and I wouldn't argue too hard against that. He got stronger as the fight went on. His ground control is still very good. I was thinking about this. Of all the divisions, I think light heavyweight between like the UFC and Bellator has the most parity. By which I mean the following. If you take the 4 best light heavyweights in Bellator, in no particular order, I tend to think that's what? Vadim Nemkov, Ryan Bader, Phil Davis, and Anthony Johnson, maybe? So hypothetically, if you took those 4 guys as the best light heavyweights in Bellator, and there's a little bit of argument over the 4th spot, fine. I'm not here to completely litigate the Bellator roster. Would you be shocked if any one of those 4 guys, I don't know what would lead to this, but hypothetically, if Glover Teixeira falls out of his fight with Blachowicz and any one of those 4 guys from Bellator got the next title shot, would you be surprised if any of them beat Jan Blachowicz? And that's not me trying to dump on Jan. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. It is not me saying that Jan Blachowicz sucks. He doesn't suck. He is the UFC champion. He's the UFC champion for a reason. It's just me saying, would you be surprised if Ryan Bader fought Jan Blachowicz and beat him? I wouldn't. I would not be surprised if any of those 4 guys beat. Any of those 4 guys could fight any combination of the top 4 guys in the UFC and probably win, and could win. Like, that's not really that's not me dumping on the UFC's light heavyweight division either. If anything, it's me pointing out that the division as a whole is kind of weak, like across any number of promotions. But that's probably the division with the most parity. I would not say at all that about any other division in Bellator. You take the 4 best bantamweights in Bellator, whoever you think that happens to be. So hypothetically, Sergio Pettis is the champion, Juan Archuleta, Magomed Magomedov, I'm just throwing that one out there, and, who's the other guy? I can't remember his name. I think I would just beat Magomedov. There's another guy whose name I'm forgetting, and I apologize. I'm not trying to be dismissive. If you put any of those four in the cage with Aljamain Sterling or Petr Yan, you have too. I mean, you have too much doubt about that. You put Petr Yan in there with Sergio Pettis. I know who I'm picking. And that's not me saying Sergio Pettis is terrible. He is not a terrible fighter at all. But there is not the same level of parity. You, even heavyweight, which is, kind of a weak division on the whole, but, Ryan Bader's the heavyweight champion of Bellator. So you take the best Bellator heavyweights. So who would the four best be? What? So Bader, Czech Congo, Vitaly Minakov maybe? I think Minakov just lost. And then I don't even know who the other one would be. Timothy Johnson? I mean, you put any of those guys in there with Francis Ngannou, what do you think happens? Any of them. Or even if you want to exclude the champion, put him in there with Cyril Gane or Stipe. What happens? It's not that those guys are completely incapable of winning those fights, but really, what do we think happens here? That's not the case with 205. That's kind of all I'm saying about that. I don't have a whole lot to say about the fight or what else happened on that. I don't think a whole lot else happened on that card. The only other Bellator news, very briefly, Anthony Johnson had to pull out of his fight in the Grand Prix. He had one coming up. He was going to fight Nemkov, actually. So that would have been for the Bellator light heavyweight title. And I think he had some kind of injury, so hopefully it's not serious. All right, let's move on to some other news. Okay. Yeah. The UFC announced the next flyweight title fight. They're going to do the trilogy fight between Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo. I'm not going to lie, I don't care for this. I don't care for this pretty much at all. Now, that might seem odd to say because their first fight was so good. Really, it's a great fight. That's one of the best flyweight title fights in UFC history. It's a great fight, if not the best. I mean, if we limit our discussion to the UFC flyweight division, I think a couple of DJ's fights get unnecessarily crapped on. His first fight with Benavidez was a really good fight. His fight with Dodson's a good fight. If we're talking about great fights that you want to rewatch for all the things that make great fights. Even DJ and Cejudo's second fight is a good. I disagree with the scoring. That's a good fight. But yeah, that's probably the best. So then you have Cejudo vacating. You have Figueiredo and Benavidez twice, and then you have Figueiredo and who'd he smash? Brandon Royval, I think. And then you had Moreno and Figueiredo. And then their first fight was great. Yeah, that I'm gonna call that. Yeah, that's the best That might be the best flyweight fight period in UFC history. It's a great fight. They do the immediate rematch because it ends in a draw, and Moreno with a darn near perfect performance wins the belt. Here's my gripe. It wasn't Royval that he took. It was Perez. It was Alex Perez that Figueiredo guillotined in his first title defense. Point being, you've got two guys right now who should be fighting for the belt in the form. Honestly, I'm not even going to split the difference. Like there are some people out there going, well, with his last, I think it was Pantoja, the people with his last performance were kind of going for. Yeah, when he beat Royval, he was a dominant fight, but let's be real, people. The next challenger should be one person and one person only, and that's Askar Askarov. Askarov has never lost. He is 14-0-1. You know that one? The draw? His UFC debut, he went to a split draw with Brandon Moreno. Since then, Askarov has beaten Tim Elliott, Alexandre Pantoja, and Joseph Benavidez. Askarov should be fighting for the title. Now, I can guess why he's not. And let's not mince words about this. The UFC will give slightly preferential matchmaking and policies towards fighters that they want to remain in a highlighted position to for market reasons. Look, that's why Zhang Weili is getting an immediate rematch with Rose Namajunas. Okay, there's no meritocratic reason for it. Zhang had a whopping one title defense. Don't get me wrong, that fight with Joanna, amazing. An amazing, gutsy, that's a great fight. That might be the best women's fight ever, period, and is one of the best fights ever, regardless of gender. Great fight. But it's one title defense, and then you get knocked out clean via head kick in your next one. She's getting this shot because the UFC still kind of wants someone to be the face of the UFC and MMA in general to help open up the Chinese market. Brandon Moreno is the first Mexican UFC champion. Don't give me the Cain Velasquez stuff. Cain was born in Arizona. And Moreno is Mexican born and raised. There's a reason that the people of Mexico there were big murals painted about, which is kind of a thing that people do after he won. Like, Moreno is potentially their key to opening up, to getting some more popularity in the Mexican market. And I say Mexican specifically because, well, other countries are not Mexico. And Mexico has a long history of boxing in particular, producing some great, great fighters. And finally, kind of finding someone to maybe be the face of MMA and the UFC in a large country with a history in combat sports. They're going to try to get as much out of him as they can, and when you factor that in with rematching their first fight was still great. Like that's kind of the thought process going on here. I mean, you can do Moreno and Figueiredo in a rematch of a fight that everyone loves for good reason. Their second fight went Moreno's way pretty handily and provided the first Mexican champion in the history of the UFC. So we can run this back again with the high probability of getting, at a bare minimum, a good fight, and potentially your budding face of the sport in largely not completely untapped, but an area of the world that you're trying to open up. Or you can do Brandon Moreno against a guy who already fought him to a draw, who's a legally deaf Russian in a fight that's a tough matchup for Brandon Moreno stylistically. I've said this before about Askarov. I think he's coming for that belt. I think he's gonna wear it. I don't know if it'll be his first title shot that he climbs the mountain or not. He might need two, but I think very, very highly of his abilities. And I do think that if they were to make Askarov and Moreno, I might lean Askarov, just candidly. But the UFC is doing what it's doing. I mean, Pantoja already lost to Askarov and Figueiredo. The argument here, I think the point that we're trying to get at is he's beaten Moreno twice. He submitted him on their season of The Ultimate Fighter, which doesn't actually count, and then he beat him in 2018. Like they're trying to run that angle. But Askarov should be having next. So, I mean, I'm not going to complain. I'm going to object on the meritocratic standpoint and even a little bit on the logic behind it being a bit. It's really weird to say they're protecting Brandon Moreno by putting him back in there with Davis and Figueiredo, right? Like, that's bad protection if you want to, if the argument is they're protecting him. But I think they're trying to avoid him being in a not just a stylistically bad fight, but a fight that they're not sure they could really sell a whole lot. Uh, and I don't like it, but I'm not going to complain too much about getting to watch Figueiredo and Moreno square up again, because they have some really good fight chemistry. Okay, all right. Next up, there were some retirements over the last week. Two in particular. Let me start with Carlos Condit, because the Natural Born Killer announced his retirement from MMA, and if you didn't see Carlos Condit when he was, if you didn't watch him when he was the WEC welterweight champion, you missed out on a violent, violent man, and he was violent in the UFC too. I mean, that he has put on some of the best fights you'll ever see. I absolutely mean that. I don't want to name the big one right off the bat, so hang on. I mean, he came into the UFC, lost a split decision to Martin Kampmann. He should have won that fight. Won a split decision over Jake Ellenberger. He probably should have lost. But his fight with Rory McDonald, man, that's a pretty serious comeback to get a TKO in the third. Brutally knocks out Dan Hardy. Brutally knocks out Dong Hyun Kim. Beats Nick Diaz via 5-round decision. I know some people got a little bit salty about that, but they beat him pretty clean. That became the interim champion off of that. Lost to GSP in a 5-round fight. Did drop him with a head kick, though, in a highlight that gets played a lot. Lost to Johnny Hendricks. Beat Martin Kampmann in a rematch. He stopped him in the 4th round. Had the leg injury when he fought Tyron Woodley. Came back. He badly beat... he broke Thiago Alves's nose so badly. If you ever happen to find one of those old martial arts masters who do the, if you hit someone's nose just right, you can send bone fragments into their brain. No, you can't. That's not a thing. It would have happened by now. Show them Thiago Alves's broken nose, because if that broken nose didn't do what all those self-defense experts claim it would do, it can't happen. Like that's just not a thing. I mean, your nose isn't actually bone. It's cartilage. Some of it is hard cartilage, that's why it can break, but it's not. I mean, for your lower ribs, they're like half cartilage. They still break. Like hard cartilage is, it's still not pleasant to have broken, but it doesn't. You can't do that. Then, oh, the poor man. If you've never seen his fight with Robbie Lawler, UFC 195, loses for the title, loses a split decision, I thought he won. Straight up, I thought I scored that for him. I thought he should have won it. But that fight is the best title fight in UFC welterweight history. That is maybe the best welterweight fight ever, period. That is maybe the best fight ever. And I know when you get to like the top 10 or so fights ever encompassing the history of MMA across all promotions, that gets real dicey. Anybody that says Robbie Lawler, Carlos Condit is the best fight ever, I'm not. I mean, how are you going to argue that? Like, what's your count? Like, you can say, okay, here's something else that's, by pretty much any metric as great, and I have my preferences. Like, that's what you're down to. That is that is one of the greatest fights ever. Something else about Carlos Condit. He made a choice. When he was coming up in the welterweight division, that was a division full of wrestlers. And it was noted for a long time that his wrestling defense in particular was a bit of an Achilles heel. And it's not that he never worked on it. but he deliberately did not become a wrestler. He chose to fight. He chose to seek violence and action instead of an era of lay and pray guys. Instead of being another one of lay and pray guys, in an era of a lot of lay and pray guys. That man made a conscious decision at some point. The old joke, he chose violence. He turned in some great fights, some great moments. He was, even on his decline, he was kind of must-see TV in a lot of respects. It's probably past time for him to have retired. I mean, his fight against Max Griffin was not completely lifeless, but that was also, Condit anywhere near his prime against Max Griffin, even the best version of Max Griffin. Condit wins that fight. I wish him nothing but the best. He provided he gave so much of himself in pursuit of MMA success, glory, fame, whatever. So Condit's retired. I feel a little bit older because some of these guys that I came up watching are now retiring, but I wish him nothing but the best. Also wishing nothing but the best to another retired fighter, former 4-time flyweight title challenger Joseph Benavidez. Benavidez announced his retirement this last week as well. Joseph Benavidez might be... Okay, if you take out the interim title, if you take out the interim part of it, I think Joseph Benavidez is pretty clearly the best... I can't say pretty clearly. He is my argument and my choice for the best fighter to never win a UFC title. You can argue some other people. There's other names on that list. There's Jacare. There's Dan Henderson. Jeez, who else? It's not a list I keep off the top of my head, but there's a list. There's Rory McDonald, actually. Might argue Rory, now that I think about it. You could argue Condit. I mean, again, some people count the interim title. If you want to count people who won interim but never won the real belt, and then who's the best to never hold it, maybe at that point it's Dustin Poirier. There's a lot of ways you can go with this. If we exclude interim champions just for the sake of making the discussion easier, I think the answer is Joseph Benavidez. He fought the majority of his early career at bantamweight and was undersized and still, I mean, for the first 29 fights of this man's career, he had 4 losses, and they were to 2 people. He lost to Dominic Cruz, and he lost to Demetrius Johnson, and that was it. I mean, if you look up just his WEC run, right? Beats Danny Martinez, who was a pretty big deal at the time, beats Jeff Curran. If you may not remember Jeff Curran, the Big Frog, especially if depending on when you came along, Jeff Curran was a really good fighter. Benavidez beat him. He fights Dominic Cruz at WEC 42, loses a unanimous decision. Really good fight, actually. He follows that up by TKOing Ronnie Yahya in the first round. And then people won't respect how... Contemporary fight fans may not remember this, but when he choked out Miguel Torres after opening up a gash in his forehead so deep you could see his skull, which is not a joke. If you got a strong constitution, look up Miguel Torres' cut, and you will see what he did to him with that elbow, and then choked him out with a guillotine. Miguel Torres was 1 fight removed from his long run of dominance as champion. And he smashed that guy. Then he fights for the title and loses a split decision that shouldn't have been split. But, again, to Dominic Cruz. Chokes out Wagner Fabiano, moves to the UFC, beats Ian Loveland, beats Eddie Wineland, all still at bantamweight. Moves to flyweight, where he is more naturally suited frame-wise. TKO's Yasuhiro Ushitani. Ushitani was like the king of the flyweights in Japan, where there's a lot more guys that size. He TKOs him in the second round. Has a heck of a fight with Demetrius Johnson at UFC 152. Loses split decision. Goes on to beat Ian McCall via clear decision. TKOs Darren Uenoyama with a body shot. TKOs Jussier Formiga. Fights Demetrius Johnson again. Gets brutally knocked out. Is not deterred. Knocked out in the first round. I love that knockout from Demetrius, by the way. That's a great knockout. Is not deterred. Gets back on the horse. Beats Tim Elliott via guillotine choke in the first round. Beats Dustin Ortiz, John Moraga, Ali Bagutinov, Zach Makovsky. Beats Henry Cejudo. I thought Henry should have won that fight, but the scoring notwithstanding. Like that's a great run. He loses a split decision to Sergio Pettis. Shouldn't have been split. That was Pettis, clearly. But after, a significant layoff, he is again not deterred. Proceeds to TKO Alex Perez, decision Dustin Ortiz clearly, and stops Jussier Formiga again. At which point he fights Davison Figueiredo for the vacant belt and is brutally stopped. Fights him again and is brutally stopped. And then loses to Askar Askarov. But look at that list. That man never won a title. He only got close to winning the belt once. That being the first fight with Demetrius Johnson. His other title opportunities were not especially close. Again, brutally knocked out by DJ in their rematch. Finally gets a shot for the vacant belt against Figueiredo. Is brutally stopped in the second. Gets a rematch and is brutally stopped in the first. This time via choke after being bludgeoned. But that man is an all-time great flyweight. Pretty easily. His career is genuinely great. I think he's the best guy to never wear UFC gold. And again, if you want to include if you want to exclude interim, if you want to say the interim title doesn't count, that tends to be my thought process. But if you do, then maybe it's Dustin Poirier instead of Benavidez. But at that point, I think it's those two. Like, that's it. And again, I say that with all due respect to Dan Henderson. He had multiple shots at the title. The only time he got close was when he fought, Michael Bisping, when Bisping shouldn't have been fighting him after Bisping's upset win over Luke Rockhold. He had plenty of other shots, and Henderson had his fight with Rampage, actually, for the 205 title with Quentin Jackson. A slightly forgotten, good fight. Really good fight. But not terribly close. His fight with Anderson Silva, he had a good first round, and then Silva finished him in the second, I seem to recall. He almost had a title shot at light heavyweight again, but, his knee got injured, and he lied about it, and then couldn't get it. And then he got the other shot at middleweight, where, to whatever credit you want to give, came fairly close to beating Michael Bisping. But I think it's Benavidez. I think if you look technically and where he was in his division, that guy was held down by Demetrius Johnson. Especially after that second fight. There's any time after that second fight when he beat Elliott, Ortiz, Moraga, Bagutinov, and Makovsky. After any of those, okay, after the Moraga fight on, he could have been given a title shot, and wasn't, just because he's already lost to DJ twice, and the second time he lost, he was brutally stopped in the first round. When the UFC announced that flyweight tournament, we all assumed it was Benavidez, that he was going to be the guy to win. And credit to Demetrius Johnson, who is one of the all-time greats. But yeah, and he announced his retirement, and I wish nothing but the best for that guy. He was always an interesting fight. He succeeded across 2 weight classes. One of, by all accounts, the nicest guys. Plenty of people have interviewed him and had nice things to say about him. He's been a class act all the way through, which is more than can be said of other members of his camp, but that's a different story. He was always like the one guy from Team Alpha Male who didn't seem to fit, right? Like you look at everybody else and their personality is a little bit mesh, and yeah, you kind of know what you're in for there. He's the one who never quite seemed to fit. Like I mean, he did. He fought out of there for the vast majority of his career, but personality-wise, he didn't quite seem to fit with those other guys. So, I wish him nothing but the best, man. He's provided a lot of great fights, a lot of great moments as well, and Godspeed in whatever you do next, sir. We had a couple of guys whose names should be remembered in the history books, and sadly might not be. Hang him up this last week, so yeah. All right. Let's see. Anything else? Let me check Twitter one more time, and if not, we will go ahead and get out of here. Alright, does not look like anything is broken since I've been recording this, so let's do plugs and get out of here. Alright, last week I reviewed, I believe it was Malignant. Yeah, last week was a Damn You Hollywood for Malignant, the James Wan film that Mark and I did on Damn You Hollywood, so please check that out. As usual, also my pro wrestling coverage. Let's see, this week, so speaking of this week, AEW's Dark Elevation Monday, potentially something Wednesday if MLW gets around to releasing anything, and WWE SmackDown on Fridays. I'm going to take part in a triple feature review segment this Tuesday in place of Damn You Hollywood. Myself and Mark Radlich are going to get to together and discuss a trio of neo-Western movies. Concrete Cowboys, the Netflix movie starring Idris Elba, the recently released Cry Macho starring Clint Eastwood. And from a little bit in the Wayback Machine, Mark gave me a few options of movies that, to round out the triple part of the triple feature, what's one from the past, and we'd settled on Hell or High Water, the movie starring Chris Pine and Jeff Bridges from a few years ago. That is a genuinely great piece of filmmaking. So we'll be talking about those three on triple feature this Tuesday. And I think that's my only thing at the moment. So, yeah, that's what I got. And then again, my usual slate of coverage up to and including UFC 266 on Saturday. We will be back here next week for to review UFC 266 and to preview. Preview? Let me double check that real fast. Yes, we will preview UFC on ESPN Plus 51, headlined by Thiago Santos and Johnny Walker. Let me look at this card real fast. Misha Serkinov trying his hand at middleweight. It's moderately interesting. Yeah, there's not a whole lot here. But we'll have a full preview next week, so I will see you all then. Until then, thank you all very much again for tuning in. I deeply appreciate you. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.